The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the San Elizario General Store, and Frances Brennan stepped down onto the dusty Texas street with one hand pressed protectively against her swollen belly, knowing every eye in town would soon be judging the unmarried woman who dared arrive 6 months pregnant and alone. It was September 1878, and the late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small border town near El Paso. Frances adjusted her bonnet with trembling fingers, trying to maintain some dignity as the stage driver handed down her single-worn trunk. She had traveled all the way from St. Louis with the last of her savings, following the address of a distant aunt she barely remembered, only to learn from the stage driver that the woman had passed away 2 months prior. "Need help with that, miss?" The driver's voice held a mixture of pity and awkwardness as he gestured to her trunk. "I can manage, thank you." Frances tried to keep her voice steady, though panic was rising in her chest. She had nowhere to go, almost no money, and a child coming in 3 months. The shame that had driven her from St. Louis felt even heavier here, where she knew no one and had no prospects. She dragged her trunk toward the wooden sidewalk, each step an effort in her condition. Sweat dampened her collar and her back ached terribly. Through the window of the general store, she could see 2 women watching her, their faces already forming judgments. Frances wanted to disappear into the dusty ground beneath her feet. "Madam, you should not be lifting that in your condition." The voice came from behind her, deep and gentle. Frances turned to see a tall cowboy approaching, his hat shading a face that looked to be in his late 20s, with kind brown eyes and sun-weathered skin. He wore simple working clothes, a blue cotton shirt and worn denim pants, with a red bandana around his neck covered in trail dust. "I do not have much choice," Frances replied, her voice catching slightly. She was so tired of charity, of pity, of the way people looked at her when they noticed her swollen belly and bare ring finger. The cowboy stepped forward anyway and lifted her trunk as though it weighed nothing. "Name is Lucas Quinn. I work the ranch just outside town. Where are you headed?" Frances felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. "I was coming to stay with my aunt, Brennan, but I have just learned she passed away. I suppose I will need to find the boarding house." Lucas set the trunk down gently on the sidewalk and regarded her with those steady brown eyes. "Miss Alina was your aunt. She was a fine woman. I am sorry for your loss." He paused, seeming to consider something. "The boarding house closed down 3 months back when Mrs. Henderson moved to live with her daughter in Santa Fe. There is not much in the way of lodging in San Elizario, I am afraid." The panic Frances had been fighting burst through her careful composure. "Then, what am I supposed to do?" "I have traveled 1,000 miles. I have no family, no husband, and nowhere to go." Her voice cracked on the last words and she pressed her hand against her mouth, mortified at breaking down in front of a stranger. Lucas looked at her for a long moment, then at her belly, then back to her face. Something seemed to shift in his expression, a decision being made. "Miss Alina's house is still standing. It belongs to the town now, I suppose, but no one has done anything with it yet. You could stay there, at least for tonight, while you figure things out." "I cannot just take someone's house," Frances protested weakly. "You are her family. I think she would want you to have shelter." Lucas picked up her trunk again. "Come on. It is just down this street. We can worry about the particulars tomorrow." Frances followed him, aware of the stares from townspeople, aware of how this must look. But she was too exhausted and desperate to care much. They walked 3 blocks down the main street, past the saloon and the small church, to a modest adobe house with a covered porch. Lucas set her trunk down and produced a key from his pocket. "How do you have a key?" Frances asked. "I helped Miss Alina with repairs and such. She trusted me to look after things. He unlocked the door and pushed it open. Dust motes danced in the sunlight that streamed through the windows. The furniture was covered with sheets, but the house was tidy and well kept. Frances stepped inside and felt something in her chest loosen slightly. It smelled of sage and old wood, and though it was not grand, it was shelter. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn. I do not know how I will repay your kindness." Lucas brought her trunk inside and set it by the door. "No repayment needed, miss, but I did not catch your name." Frances Brennan." "Well, Miss Brennan, I imagine you could use some supplies. The well out back should still be good, but you will need food and such. I will bring some things by later if that is all right with you." Frances wanted to refuse, to maintain some shred of pride, but she was so tired and so scared. "That would be very kind, but Mr. Quinn, you should know that I am not a widow. I am not married at all. My situation is not respectable, and I would understand if you want nothing to do with helping me." She forced herself to meet his eyes as she said it, expecting to see the judgment and disgust she had grown accustomed to. Instead, Lucas just nodded slowly. "I figure that is your business, Miss Brennan. What I see is a woman who needs help and a child who deserves to be born healthy and safe. The rest does not matter much to me." The simple kindness of his words made Frances's eyes fill with tears again. "Thank you," she whispered. Lucas tipped his hat. "I will be back in a couple of hours with some supplies. You should rest." He headed for the door, then paused and turned back. "Miss Brennan, whatever happened before, you are here now. San Elizario is not a large town, and folks can be judgmental, but there are good people here too. You do not have to face this alone." After he left, Frances sank into the old chair and let herself cry properly for the first time in months. She cried for her foolishness in trusting Thomas, the man who had promised to marry her and then disappeared the moment she told him about the baby. She cried for her father, who had thrown her out of the house, calling her a disgrace to the family name. She cried for her mother, who had wept but done nothing to stop him. And she cried from sheer exhaustion and fear about what would happen when the baby came. But underneath all that, she felt the smallest flicker of hope. A stranger had shown her kindness without expecting anything in return. It was more than she had received in the last 6 months. True to his word, Lucas returned 2 hours later with a basket of supplies. Frances had used the time to uncover the furniture and sweep out the worst of the dust. Her back ached and she was moving slowly, but the activity had helped settle her nerves. "I brought some basics," Lucas said, setting the basket on the kitchen table. "Flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, some eggs from the ranch. There is more where that came from, so do not worry about rationing too severely. Mr. Quinn, I cannot accept charity indefinitely. I need to find work." Lucas leaned against the doorframe, considering her. "What kind of work did you do in St. Louis?" "I taught piano and helped with bookkeeping at my father's mercantile. But I do not imagine there is much call for piano lessons in San Elizario, and I doubt anyone would hire me for respectable work in my condition. The schoolteacher, Mrs. Morrison, is getting on in years and struggling with keeping up with all the children. She might appreciate help, though I will not lie to you, there will be talk. The town council might object to an unmarried pregnant woman working with children." Frances sat down heavily at the table, the brief hope she had felt deflating. "Then what am I supposed to do? Take charity until I have the baby, then what? I cannot raise a child with no means of supporting us." Lucas pulled out a chair and sat across from her. His face was serious, thoughtful. "Miss Brennan, I am going to say something, and I want you to hear me out before you respond." She nodded, uncertain what was coming. "I own a small ranch about 3 miles outside town. It is not much, just 100 acres and a herd of about 50 cattle plus some horses. I do all right, enough to live on and save a bit. The house is small but solid. I built it myself 2 years ago when I finally had enough to buy the land." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I am 27 years old, never been married. I have always figured I would settle down someday when the right woman came along. But ranching is hard work, and there are not many unmarried women in these parts." Frances felt her heart begin to pound, unsure where this was going. "What I am trying to say is this," Lucas continued, meeting her eyes steadily. "You need security and respectability. Your child needs a father and a name. I could provide those things. I am proposing marriage, Miss Brennan, a practical arrangement that would solve both our problems." Frances stared at him, too shocked to speak for a moment. "Mr. Quinn, you do not even know me. Why would you tie yourself to a woman carrying another man's child? I know you are in a difficult situation through no fault of your own, or at least no fault that matters to me. I know you have courage to have traveled all this way alone in your condition. I know you have pride because you keep talking about not taking charity." He leaned forward slightly. "And I know that child deserves a father who stays. Every child deserves that. But marriage is meant to be about love and partnership, not just practical necessity," Frances protested, even as part of her was desperately drawn to the security he was offering. "My parents married for practical reasons. My mother needed a home. My father needed a wife to help run the ranch. They grew to love each other over time. It is not the romance story novels tell, but it worked. They were happy." Lucas's voice was gentle but firm. "I am not saying you have to decide right now, but think about it, Miss Brennan. Think about what it would mean for you and for your baby." After Lucas left, Frances sat in the growing darkness, her hand on her belly where the baby was moving. The child turned and kicked, a reminder of the reality she faced. In 3 months, she would give birth. What kind of life could she offer this baby alone? She had almost no money, no family to help her, and few prospects for work. As an unmarried mother, she would face scorn and discrimination everywhere she went. Her child would bear the stigma of being born illegitimate. But to marry a man she did not know, a stranger who was offering this out of pity, was that fair to him or to her? Yet as she sat there in the darkness, she thought about Lucas's words. That child deserves a father who stays. It was more than Thomas had offered. It was more than she had any right to expect. And there had been something in Lucas's eyes, a steadiness and kindness that made her want to trust him. Frances barely slept that night, wrestling with the decision. By the time the sun rose, she had made up her mind. She would accept Lucas's proposal, but she would make it clear that she would not be a burden. She would work hard, contribute to the household, and try to be a good wife even if it had not started in the traditional way. She walked into town late that morning, moving slowly in the heat. Several townspeople gave her obvious stares, and she heard whispered conversations fall silent as she passed. At the general store, she asked where she might find Lucas Quinn and was told he was at the livery stable. Frances found him there, brushing down a beautiful chestnut mare. He looked up as she approached, and she saw hope flicker in his eyes before he carefully masked it. "Mr. Quinn, I have considered your proposal," she said without preamble. "If the offer still stands, I accept, but I have conditions." "All right." He set down the brush and gave her his full attention. "I will not be simply a kept woman. I will contribute to the household however I can. I will work hard and I will be a proper wife in all the ways that matter. But I cannot promise love, at least not right away. I have been hurt badly and I need time to trust again." "That is fair," Lucas said. "I am not expecting you to love me on command. I am hoping we can build something good together, but I understand that takes time." "And the child," Francis continued, "you must understand that I will not tolerate anyone treating this baby as lesser or unwanted. If you cannot fully accept this child as yours, then I cannot marry you." Lucas stepped closer, his expression serious and intent. "Miss Brennan, I meant what I said. That child deserves a father who stays. If you marry me, that baby will be mine in every way that matters. I will give the child my name, my protection, and my love. You have my word on that." The sincerity in his voice made Francis's throat tight with emotion. "Then yes, Mr. Quinn, I will marry you." A smile broke across Lucas's face, transforming it. "Lucas, you should call me Lucas if we are going to be married. Then you should call me Francis." They were married 3 days later by the minister at the small adobe church. Lucas had insisted on waiting a few days so Francis could rest, and so he could make some preparations at the ranch. He had also bought her a simple dress in a soft blue fabric that accommodated her pregnancy, and a silver wedding band that had belonged to his mother. The ceremony was small, attended only by the minister and 2 witnesses, a rancher named Joe and his wife Martha, who were friends of Lucas. Francis could tell Martha was curious about the situation, but the older woman was kind and welcomed her warmly. "Do you, Lucas Quinn, take Frances Brennan to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" the minister asked. "I do," Lucas said firmly, his eyes on Francis. "And do you, Frances Brennan, take Lucas Quinn to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Francis took a breath and met Lucas's steady gaze. "I do." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas leaned in and gave her the gentlest kiss on the cheek. It was chaste and respectful, but Francis felt warmth spread through her at the contact. Afterward, Martha hugged her carefully. "Welcome to San Elizario, dear. Lucas is a good man. You have made a fine choice, and he is lucky to have you." Francis wanted to explain that it was not quite like that, but she just smiled and thanked her. Lucas had brought the wagon to take Francis and her few belongings to the ranch. As they rode out of town, Francis studied the landscape. The terrain was harsh and beautiful, all brown dirt and scrub brush, with mountains visible in the distance. The sky was impossibly wide and blue. "It is different from St. Louis," she said quietly. "I imagine so. Do you miss it?" Francis considered the question. "I miss what it was before everything went wrong. I miss my mother, though she did not stand up for me when it mattered. But I do not miss the city itself, or the life I had there." "Tell me about what happened if you want to," Lucas said. "You do not have to, but I would like to understand." It was hard to talk about, but something about Lucas's presence made it easier. As the wagon rolled across the rough trail, Francis told him about Thomas Whitmore, the charming banker's son who had courted her properly for 6 months. How he had promised marriage and convinced her that it was all right to be together, because they would be wed soon anyway. How she had believed him because she had been foolish and naive. And how he had disappeared the moment she told him about the baby, his family suddenly denying that there had ever been any serious courtship. "My father did not believe me. He said I had shamed the family with my loose behavior. He gave me $50 and told me to leave and never come back. My mother packed my things and gave me my aunt's address. She cried, but she did not fight for me, so I left." Lucas was quiet for a moment after she finished. When he spoke, his voice was tight with anger, though she sensed it was not directed at her. "That man is a coward, and your father was wrong. You deserved better than that." "I was foolish," Francis said. "You trusted someone who did not deserve it. That does not make you foolish. It makes him a liar and a coward." Lucas glanced at her. For what it is worth, I am glad you came here, even if the circumstances were not what you expected." They arrived at the ranch as the sun was beginning to lower in the sky. The house was indeed small, built of rough-hewn timber with a sloped roof. But it was solid and well-made, with a covered porch and shuttered windows. Behind it stood a barn and several corrals, and beyond that, the land stretched out toward the hills. Lucas helped her down from the wagon carefully. "It is not fancy, but it is home." Inside, the house consisted of a main room that served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace on one wall and a cooking stove in the corner. A door led to a bedroom, and another to a small room that Lucas explained he had been using for storage. "I cleaned out that second room," he said, looking almost shy. "I thought it could be for the baby when the time comes. I can build a cradle and we can get whatever else is needed." Frances looked at the small room, imagining it filled with the things a baby would need. She felt overwhelmed suddenly by the reality of everything. Just a week ago, she had been on a stagecoach, terrified and alone. Now she was married to a man she barely knew, in a house in the middle of the Texas frontier, preparing for a baby who would arrive in just a few months. "Are you all right?" Lucas asked, concern in his voice. "I do not know," Frances admitted. "Everything has happened so fast. I am grateful, truly, but I am also frightened. What if I cannot be the wife you need? What if I cannot manage ranch life? What if something goes wrong with the baby?" Lucas guided her to a chair and knelt beside it so he could look up at her face. "You do not have to be perfect, Frances. You just have to do your best, and I will do the same. We will figure it out together. As for the baby, when the time comes, we will get the midwife from town. Mrs. Martinez has delivered half the children in the county. You will be all right." "You cannot promise that," Frances whispered. "No, I cannot. But I can promise that you will not face it alone. I will be here, no matter what happens." He reached up and took her hand. "I know this is not the marriage you dreamed of when you were young, but I am going to do everything I can to make sure you and that baby are safe and cared for. That is a promise I can keep." The first weeks of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Lucas was up before dawn to tend to the animals and work the land. Frances learned to cook on the wood stove, a process that involved much trial and error. Her first attempt at biscuits had been hard as rocks, and Lucas had eaten them anyway without complaint, though she had seen him struggling. "You can say they are terrible," she had said. "They are a bit hard," he had admitted with a smile, "but I appreciate the effort. You will get the hang of it." And she had, slowly. Martha came to visit and gave her tips on cooking and managing a ranch household. The older woman was warm and friendly, and Frances was grateful for the companionship. Martha never asked invasive questions about her pregnancy or the rushed marriage, and Frances appreciated that discretion. Lucas was unfailingly kind and patient with her. He slept on the floor of the main room, giving her the bedroom for privacy. He never pressured her or made her feel uncomfortable. He treated her with respect and consideration, asking about her day, listening when she talked, and making sure she did not overwork herself. In return, Frances tried to be a good wife. She learned to cook properly, mended his clothes, kept the house clean, and managed the small vegetable garden he had started. As her pregnancy advanced, some tasks became harder, but she pushed through, not wanting to be a burden. One evening about a month after the wedding, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Frances had her hands on her belly, feeling the baby move. "You want to feel?" she asked impulsively. Lucas looked surprised but pleased. "May I?" When she nodded, he carefully placed his hand on her belly. His hand was large and warm and calloused from work. They sat there quietly until the baby kicked, and Lucas's face lit up with wonder. "That is remarkable," he said softly. There is a whole person in there getting ready to meet the world. Are you frightened? Francis asked. About becoming a father to a child who is not yours by blood? No, Lucas said firmly. I meant what I said at our wedding. This child will be mine in every way that matters. Blood does not make a family. Love and commitment do. Frances felt something shift in her chest, a warming toward this man who had asked nothing of her but had given her everything she needed. You are a good man, Lucas Quinn. I am just a man, Francis. But I am trying to be the man you and that baby need. November arrived with cooler weather, a relief after the intense heat of late summer and early autumn. Francis was growing larger and more uncomfortable, finding it hard to sleep and even harder to move around easily. Lucas took over more of the household tasks without making her feel useless, and he fashioned a cushioned chair that helped ease her back pain. The people of San Elizario had been a mixed group in their reactions to the marriage. Some, like Martha and Joe, had welcomed Francis warmly. Others were cold and judgmental, whispering when she came to town and making their disapproval clear. Francis tried not to let it bother her, but sometimes the shame still crept in. One afternoon, she was at the general store buying supplies when two women from the church began talking in voices just loud enough for her to hear. I do not understand why Lucas Quinn would tie himself to that woman. She is clearly carrying another man's child and not even married when she arrived. Some men will take anything they can get, I suppose, though it is a shame. He could have done much better. Frances felt her face burn with humiliation. She paid for her purchases quickly and left, but the words followed her home. When Lucas came in that evening, he found her crying at the kitchen table. What happened? He asked, immediately concerned. She told him about the women at the store, feeling foolish for letting it affect her so much. Maybe they are right. Maybe you could have done better. You deserve a proper wife, not someone with my history. Lucas pulled a chair close and sat down, his face serious. Francis, look at me. When she met his eyes, he continued, I do not give a damn what those women think. I married you because I wanted to, because I believed it was the right thing to do. And every day since, I have been glad I made that choice. You are kind and hardworking and brave. You left everything you knew to try to make a life for yourself and your baby. That takes courage. Those women who judge you, they have no idea what you have been through. But you do deserve better, Francis insisted. I have exactly what I want. A wife who is becoming my partner, who works hard to build this life with me, who makes me laugh at dinner and who is trying her best. That is more than enough. He reached out and wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. You are more than enough, Francis. She covered his hand with hers, holding it against her cheek. Thank you for everything, for giving me a home and a name and respect when I had none. For caring about this baby, for being patient with me. You do not need to thank me. We are family now. That is what family does. The word family settled into Francis's heart like a seed taking root. She was starting to feel like this place, this man, could truly be home. As her due date approached in early December, Lucas became increasingly protective. He insisted she rest more, and he worked closer to the house so he could check on her frequently. Mrs. Martinez, the midwife, came to visit and examine Francis, declaring that everything looked normal and healthy. Your husband is worried like all first-time fathers, Mrs. Martinez said with a smile. But you are strong, and the baby is positioned well. When the time comes, send him to fetch me, and we will bring this little one into the world safely. On a cold December morning, Francis woke to the first contractions. At first, she thought they might be the false pains Mrs. Martinez had warned her about, but as they continued and grew stronger, she knew it was time. She woke Lucas, who practically leaped from his bedroll on the floor. I will go get Mrs. Martinez right now. Will you be all right here alone? I will be fine. The pains are still far apart, but please hurry back. Lucas rode into town at a gallop and returned with Mrs. Martinez in record time. The midwife shooed him out of the bedroom and got to work helping Francis through the labor. It was long and painful, lasting through the day and into the evening. Francis had never experienced anything so intense, and there were moments when she feared she could not continue. But Mrs. Martinez was calm and encouraging, and she could hear Lucas pacing outside the door, his presence a comfort even though he could not be in the room. Finally, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in colors of gold and crimson, Francis gave one final push and heard the sound she had been waiting for, the strong, healthy cry of her baby. "It is a boy," Mrs. Martinez announced, placing the cleaned and wrapped infant in Francis's arms. A beautiful, healthy boy. Francis looked down at her son, overwhelmed with love and relief. He had dark hair and was crying lustily, his tiny fists waving. He was perfect, absolutely perfect, and in that moment, all the pain and fear and shame of the past months fell away, replaced by pure joy. "Can Lucas come in?" Francis asked. Mrs. Martinez smiled and opened the door. Lucas rushed in, his face anxious until he saw Francis sitting up, looking tired but well, with the baby in her arms. "Come meet your son," Francis said softly. Lucas approached almost reverently, looking down at the tiny baby with wonder. "He is so small. Would you like to hold him?" With Mrs. Martinez's guidance, Lucas carefully took the baby, cradling him with surprising gentleness for such a big, rough-handed rancher. The baby stopped crying and looked up at him with unfocused eyes, and Francis watched something profound happen in Lucas's expression. "Hello, little one," Lucas said quietly. "I am your father, and I am going to take care of you and your mother always. That is a promise." Tears slid down Francis's cheeks, but they were happy tears. She had been so afraid that Lucas might feel differently once the baby was born, that seeing another man's child might change his feelings. But looking at him now, the way he held her son with such care and spoke to him with such love, she knew her fears had been unfounded. "What should we name him?" Lucas asked, looking up at Francis. She had been thinking about this for weeks. "What was your father's name?" James Quinn." Lucas's voice was soft with emotion. "Then I would like to name him James, if that is all right with you. James Lucas Quinn." Lucas's eyes grew bright. "You would give him my name as his middle name. You are his father. He should carry your name." Lucas carefully handed the baby back to Francis and knelt beside the bed. "Thank you for letting me be part of this, for giving him my name, for trusting me with both of you." Francis reached out and touched his face, feeling the scratch of his beard against her palm. "You have earned that trust every day since I met you. You have shown me what a real man is, Lucas. What a real father is. Not the man who ran away when things got difficult, but the man who stayed, who chose to stay." Something shifted between them in that moment, something that had been building slowly over the past months. Francis realized that somewhere along the way, she had started to fall in love with her husband. It was not the wild, passionate love she had thought she felt for Thomas. It was something deeper and more solid, built on respect and kindness and shared experiences. It was real. Lucas seemed to sense the change too. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and kissed her gently on the lips. It was their first real kiss, and it was sweet and full of promise. "I love you, Francis," he said quietly. "I do not know when it happened, but somewhere along the way you stopped being a practical arrangement and became my wife in my heart." "I love you too," Francis whispered back. "I did not think I could love again after everything that happened, but you showed me I was wrong. You showed me what real love is." Mrs. Martinez, who had been tidying up discreetly on the other side of the room, cleared her throat. "I will leave you three alone now. Francis, you need to rest as much as possible. The baby will be hungry often in these first days. Lucas, make sure she eats well and does not overdo it. I will check back in a few days." After the midwife left, Lucas pulled a chair close to the bed and sat watching Francis nurse the baby for the first time. It felt intimate and right, the three of them together like a real family. "I never imagined this," Francis said softly. "When I arrived in San Elizario, I was terrified and ashamed and certain my life was over. I never could have imagined that I would end up here, happy, with a husband I love and a healthy baby." "Life has a way of surprising us," Lucas said. "I never imagined I would meet a woman getting off a stagecoach and know immediately that I wanted to help her. But I did know, the moment I saw you trying to lift that trunk. Something in me recognized that you were important, that you were going to change my life. Do you regret it, any of it?" "Not for a single moment." Lucas reached out and stroked the baby's soft hair. "This is everything I have ever wanted. A family, a purpose beyond just working the land. You both have given me that." The first months with baby James were exhausting but joyful. He was a good baby, healthy and growing well, though he woke often in the night to nurse. Lucas helped however he could, changing diapers and walking the floor with James when he was fussy, singing to him in a surprisingly pleasant voice. Francis watched her husband become a father and fell more in love with him every day. He was patient and gentle with James, talking to him constantly, even though the baby could not understand. He made toys, carved a beautiful cradle, and somehow managed to keep up with all the ranch work while still being present for his family. As winter turned to spring, Francis recovered her strength and they fell into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch kept them busy, but they found time for each other too, talking in the evenings after James was asleep, sharing their days and their dreams for the future. One warm April evening, they sat on the porch with James sleeping in Francis's arms. The sunset was spectacular, and the air smelled of desert flowers blooming after a rare rain. "I have been thinking," Lucas said, "about expanding the herd. If we do well this year, we could buy more cattle, maybe hire some help. Build this ranch into something substantial to pass on to James and any other children we might have." Francis looked at him with surprise and pleasure. "Other children?" Lucas looked slightly embarrassed. "I mean, if you want them. I know James is only 5 months old and you have been through a lot, but I hope that someday we might have more children together, children we make together." "I would like that," Francis said softly. "I would like that very much." That night, for the first time since they married, Lucas came to bed with Francis instead of sleeping on his bedroll in the main room. They came together gently and sweetly, taking their time, and it was nothing like Francis's previous experience. With Thomas, it had been fumbling and quick and tinged with guilt. With Lucas, it was a true expression of love and commitment, and when it was over, Francis lay in his arms feeling cherished and complete. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Lucas replied, his arms tightening around her. "You and James are my whole world." The years that followed were not without challenges, but they were good years. The ranch prospered, and Lucas was able to expand the herd as he had hoped. They hired a young man named Miguel to help with the work, and he became a trusted friend to the family. In 1880, Francis gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth after Francis's mother. Lucas was as devoted to Elizabeth as he was to James, but Francis noticed that he had a special bond with James. He had been there from the beginning with their son, had held him minutes after his birth, had stayed up countless nights walking the floor with him. He was James's father in every way that mattered. James grew into a bright, curious boy who followed Lucas everywhere, learning about ranching and horses and cattle. When he was 4 years old, he asked Frances a question that she had been dreading. "Mama, why do I have dark hair like you but Elizabeth has light hair like Papa?" Frances looked at Lucas, unsure how to answer. They had talked about this moment, knowing it would come eventually, but she still felt nervous. Lucas knelt down so he was at James's level. "James, do you know what it means to choose someone? To decide they are important to you and that you are going to love them no matter what?" James nodded seriously. "When you were in your mama's belly, before you were born, I chose you. I decided that I was going to be your father and love you and take care of you always. And I have kept that promise every single day. Do you understand? So you are my papa because you chose me?" James asked. "That is exactly right. And I would choose you again every day for the rest of my life." James thought about this for a moment, then threw his arms around Lucas's neck. "I am glad you chose me, Papa." Lucas hugged him tightly, and Frances saw tears in her husband's eyes when he looked up at her over James's shoulder. She mouthed, "I love you," and he smiled. As James grew older, there were occasional questions and comments from other children who knew the story of his birth. But Lucas and Frances had created such a strong, loving home that James never doubted his place in the family or his father's love for him. In 1883, Frances gave birth to twin boys, Samuel and Daniel, causing quite a stir in San Elizario. The birth was difficult, but Mrs. Martinez was there again, and both babies came through healthy and strong. Lucas was beside himself with joy and terror at suddenly having 4 sons to raise. "How are we going to manage 4 boys?" he asked Frances as they looked at the twins sleeping in the cradle he had hastily built when they learned she was carrying twins. "The same way we have managed everything else," Frances said with a tired smile. "Together." And they did. The house was expanded to accommodate their growing family, with Lucas building on 2 more bedrooms. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful in the area. Lucas gained a reputation as a fair and hard-working rancher, and Frances became known for her kindness and the beautiful garden she maintained, sharing produce with neighbors. The people of San Elizario, who had once judged Frances harshly, softened over the years. It was hard to maintain judgment in the face of the obviously loving, stable family the Quinns had built. Martha remained a dear friend, and Frances made others as well, women who appreciated her practical nature and generous spirit. In 1886, Frances discovered she was pregnant again. At 32 years old with 4 boys to care for, she felt overwhelmed at first, but Lucas was thrilled and his joy was contagious. "Maybe this one will be a girl," he said hopefully. "Elizabeth would love a sister." But when the baby arrived in early 1887, it was another boy, and they named him Patrick. Elizabeth was not disappointed, though. At 7 years old, she doted on her baby brother and helped Frances care for him. James, now 9 years old, was Lucas's right hand on the ranch. He was responsible and hardworking, with a gift for handling horses that amazed everyone. He idolized Lucas, and the bond between them was beautiful to see. One evening, when James was 12, he came to Frances while she was preparing dinner. Lucas was still out working with the other boys and Patrick was napping. "Mama, can I ask you something?" James said, his voice uncertain. "Of course, sweetheart. What is it?" "Some of the boys in town were talking, and they said that Papa is not my real father, that some man in St. Louis is my real father. Is that true?" Frances set down the spoon she was holding and looked at her son, this boy who looked so much like her but had Lucas's steady, kind eyes. "Come, sit with me." They sat at the kitchen table and Frances took James's hands in hers. It is true that your father did not make you with me. There was another man before I met your father who I thought loved me, but he was not the man I believed him to be, and when he learned I was going to have you, he left. I came to San Elizario to live with my aunt, and that is where I met your father." James's face was troubled. "So Papa is not really my father?" "No, sweetheart. Papa is absolutely your father. The man who got me pregnant was just that, a man who was there for a moment. But your papa is the man who chose you before you were even born. He married me so you would have his name and his protection. He was the first person besides me to hold you. He walked the floor with you at night when you were crying. He taught you to ride and to work cattle and to be a good man. He loves you with his whole heart, James. Blood does not make a father. Love and commitment do. But why did that man leave? Did he not want me?" There was pain in James's voice. He was a coward who did not understand what a gift he was being offered. "But his loss was our gain, because it brought us here to your papa. That man's choice not to be your father gave your papa the chance to be, and he has thanked God for it every day since." James was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then he said, "I am glad Papa chose us. I would not want any other father." "Neither would I," Francis said softly. "Neither would I." That evening, after the younger children were in bed, James sought out Lucas in the barn where he was checking on a mare about to foal. "Papa, Mama told me about how I was born and how you are not my father by blood." Lucas set down the brush he had been using and turned to face his son, his expression serious. "And how do you feel about that?" "I feel like I am the luckiest boy in the world, because you chose to be my father even though you did not have to. And I want you to know that you are my real father. You are the only father I have ever wanted or needed." Lucas pulled James into a hug, and his voice was thick with emotion when he spoke. "You have been my son from the moment I first saw your mother, pregnant and scared, stepping off that stagecoach. The moment I knew about you, I loved you, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond. You are mine, James, always." The years continued to pass, marked by hard work, laughter, occasional hardships, and abundant love. The Quinn Ranch became known throughout the region, and Lucas's reputation as a fair rancher and good man was unquestioned. Frances became a pillar of the community, despite her rocky beginning in San Elizario. She taught the younger women how to make her famous bread. She organized fundraisers for the church, and she was always ready to help a neighbor in need. Their children grew healthy and strong. James became a skilled rancher, though he also showed an aptitude for numbers and business that surprised everyone. Elizabeth grew into a kind, capable young woman who had her father's steady nature and her mother's generous heart. The twins, Samuel and Daniel, were wild and adventurous, keeping everyone on their toes. And Patrick, the baby, was curious and clever, always asking questions. In 1893, when Frances was 39 years old, she discovered to her shock that she was pregnant again. The children ranged from 6-year-old Patrick to 15-year-old James, and she had thought her childbearing years were behind her. "I am too old for this," she told Lucas, though she was smiling. "Nonsense. You are perfect," Lucas said, pulling her into his arms. "And this baby will be just as loved as all the others." This time, it finally was another girl, born healthy and squalling in the spring of 1894. They named her Clara, and she was welcomed enthusiastically by her older siblings, especially Elizabeth, who was now 14 and delighted to have a baby sister. Life on the ranch continued, busy and full. Lucas and Frances worked side by side, building not just a successful ranch but a legacy of love and family. They added onto the house again to accommodate their large brood, and Lucas hired more help as the ranch expanded. James turned 18 in 1895, a young man ready to take on more responsibility. Lucas made him a full partner in the ranch, recognizing his skills and dedication. But James surprised them both by announcing that he wanted to go to school in El Paso to study business. "I love the ranch, Papa, and I plan to come back and help run it. But I want to learn about the business side of things, about markets and finance. I think it could help us expand even more, maybe get better prices for our cattle." Lucas was proud and supportive, even though he would miss having James working beside him every day. "You go and learn everything you can, son. The ranch will be here when you get back." Frances helped James pack for school, feeling emotional about her firstborn leaving home. "You have grown into such a fine young man," she told him. "Your father and I are so proud of you." "I would not be who I am without you both," James said. "Papa taught me about hard work and integrity. You taught me about kindness and resilience. Everything good in me comes from you." On the day James left for El Paso, the whole family gathered to see him off. Lucas shook his hand, then pulled him into a tight embrace. "You make us proud every day, son. Go learn and grow, but remember where home is." "I could never forget," James said. "This ranch, this family, is everything to me." After James left, Frances found Lucas standing in the barn looking out at the land they had built their life on. She slipped her hand into his. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I am fine. Just thinking about how far we have come." "Do you remember that day you arrived in San Elizario, pregnant and scared with nowhere to go?" "I remember," Frances said softly. "I remember thinking my life was over, that I had ruined everything. And look at us now. 6 beautiful children, a successful ranch, a life full of love." "It has been a good life, Frances, the best life. All because a kind cowboy saw a woman in trouble and decided to help her. You changed my life, Lucas. You saved me." "No," Lucas said, turning to face her and taking both her hands in his. "You saved me. I was just a lonely rancher with a small spread and no family. You gave me purpose and love and children. You made a house into a home. You saved me just as much as I saved you." They stood there in the barn, holding hands and looking at each other with the deep love that comes from years of partnership and shared experiences. They had built something beautiful together, something that would last long beyond their own lives. The years continued to roll by. James finished his schooling and returned home, bringing with him new ideas that helped the ranch prosper even more. In 1898, at 21 years old, he married a lovely young woman named Sarah from El Paso, and Lucas built them a small house on the ranch property so they could start their own family while still being close. Elizabeth married a rancher's son from a neighboring property in 1899. And though Frances cried to see her daughter leave, she was happy that Elizabeth would only be a few miles away. The twins, Samuel and Daniel, grew into strong young men who loved ranching and had no desire to leave. They became essential parts of running the expanding Quinn Ranch, and Lucas knew the ranch's future was secure with his son's involvement. Patrick, quiet and studious, surprised everyone by wanting to become a teacher. Lucas supported his dream wholeheartedly, remembering how important education was. And little Clara, growing up surrounded by doting older siblings, became a bright, spirited girl who charmed everyone she met. In 1900, as a new century dawned, Frances and Lucas celebrated their 22nd anniversary. They sat on the porch of the ranch house they had expanded and improved over the years, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant colors. 22 years, Frances mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that we met, and sometimes it feels like I have known you my whole life. "I have loved you for 22 years, Lucas said, "and I will love you for 22 more, and for however many years God gives us after that." Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had not met? If I had not come to San Elizario, or if you had not been at the general store that day? I try not to think about it, because a life without you and our children is not something I want to imagine. Frances leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable and content. I used to be ashamed of how we met, of the circumstances that brought me here. But not anymore. I am proud of what we have built. I am proud of our children and our life, and I am proud to be your wife. I have always been proud to be your husband, Lucas said. From the very first day. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands as the sun dipped below the horizon. Inside the house, they could hear Clara practicing her piano, a skill Frances had finally been able to teach once they had enough money to have a piano shipped from El Paso. The sound drifted through the evening air, sweet and clear. In 1902, James and Sarah welcomed their first child, a son they named Lucas after his grandfather. Frances cried happy tears when she held her first grandchild, marveling at the continuation of their family line. Lucas was beside himself with joy, proud to have a grandson bearing his name. More grandchildren followed over the years as their children married and started families of their own. The Quinn Ranch became the center of a growing family network, with Sunday dinners that brought everyone together around a long table laden with food and filled with laughter. As Frances and Lucas grew older, they gradually turned over more of the ranch operations to their sons, though Lucas never fully stopped working the land he loved. They had time now for simpler pleasures, tending Frances's expanded garden, taking rides across the ranch property, and spoiling their grandchildren. One evening in 1910, when they were both in their 50s, they sat on their porch watching several of their grandchildren playing in the yard. James and Sarah's children, Lucas Jr. and his younger brother William, Elizabeth's 3 girls, Samuel's twin boys, the yard was full of life and joy. "We have been blessed," Frances said softly, "more blessed than I ever dreamed possible." "It started with a choice," Lucas said. "I saw a woman who needed help and I chose to offer it. You chose to accept my proposal and to trust me, and every day after that we chose each other. We chose love. We chose family. Those choices made all the difference." "That child deserves a father who stays," Frances quoted, remembering the words Lucas had spoken all those years ago when he had first proposed. "You said that about James before he was even born, and you kept that promise every single day. He made it easy. They all did. Being a father and husband has been the greatest joy of my life." Frances looked at her husband, this man who had given her and her unborn child a chance when no one else would. His hair was now streaked with gray, and there were deep lines around his eyes from years of working in the sun, but he was still the same steady, kind man who had lifted her trunk that first day in San Elizario. "I love you, Lucas Quinn," she said, "more than I could ever properly express." "I love you too, Frances. You are the best decision I ever made." As the sun set over the Texas desert and their grandchildren's laughter filled the air, Frances reflected on the long, winding road that had brought her here. She had arrived in San Elizario 28 years ago, pregnant and ashamed, with no prospects and no hope. She had been saved by a cowboy who saw past her circumstances to the person she was and the person she could become. Together, they had built a life that exceeded anything she could have imagined. They had created a family bound not just by blood but by love and choice and commitment. They had weathered hardships and celebrated joys. They had worked hard and loved harder. And it had all started because one good man had decided that every child deserves a father who stays, and had kept that promise every single day since. The years continued to be kind to the Quinn family. The ranch prospered under the combined efforts of Lucas and his sons, eventually becoming one of the largest and most respected operations in the region. James's business acumen, combined with the twins' ranching skills and Lucas's leadership, created a formidable family enterprise. In 1915, they celebrated their 37th anniversary surrounded by their children, their spouses, and a growing number of grandchildren. The house was full to bursting, with people spilling out onto the porch and into the yard. Frances looked around at all the faces, all these people who existed because she and Lucas had taken a chance on each other all those years ago. James stood up to make a toast, his own hair now showing the first touches of gray at his temples. "I want to say something about my parents. About the two people who built all of this." The room quieted, everyone turning their attention to him. "My father once told me that he chose to be my father before I was even born, that he made a promise to love me and care for me, and he has kept that promise every day of my life. He taught me what it means to be a man of integrity, what it means to work hard and love your family and keep your word. Everything I am, I owe to him." James paused, his voice growing emotional. "And my mother, who traveled across the country scared and alone to give me a chance at life. Who chose to trust a stranger with her future and mine. Who built this home and this family through her love and strength. I am honored to be their son." He raised his glass. "To Lucas and Frances Quinn, the finest parents a man could ask for and the foundation of this family we all treasure." "To Lucas and Frances." Everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Lucas stood and pulled Frances into his arms, kissing her soundly while their children and grandchildren cheered. When they broke apart, both had tears in their eyes. "I would do it all again," Lucas said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Every single moment. You have given me the best life a man could hope for." "We gave each other that life," Frances corrected gently. "We built it together." As the party continued around them, Frances thought about that terrified young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 37 years ago. She wished she could go back and tell her that everything would be all right, that the shame she carried would eventually fade, that she would find love greater than anything she had imagined, that the child she carried would grow up to be a fine man with a beautiful family of his own. But that young woman would not have believed it. She would not have been able to imagine this life, this joy, this love. Sometimes you have to walk through the darkness to truly appreciate the light on the other side. Lucas and Frances lived to see their golden anniversary in 1928, 50 years after that fateful day when they married in the small church in San Elizario. The celebration was enormous, with family coming from all over Texas and beyond. They had 6 children, 18 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren by then. They stood together in the same church where they had married, renewing their vows in front of their entire family. When the minister asked Lucas if he would take Frances to be his wife, his answer was the same as it had been 50 years before: "I do." And when Frances answered, her voice was strong and certain: "I do." When they kissed, the church erupted in applause, and Frances felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt all those years ago. Love had not faded with time. If anything, it had grown deeper and stronger, aged like fine wine. At the reception, people shared stories and memories. James talked about learning to ride on his father's shoulders. Elizabeth reminisced about helping her mother in the garden. The twins recalled the time they had tried to surprise their parents by branding calves themselves, and had accidentally branded one with an upside-down Q. Patrick, now a respected teacher in El Paso with a family of his own, spoke about how his parents had supported his dreams even when they were different from the family business. And Clara, married now with 3 children, talked about growing up in a house full of love and laughter. As the sun set on that golden anniversary day, Lucas and Francis sat in the same spot where they had spent so many evenings over the years, on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sky turn brilliant colors. 50 years, Francis said wonderingly. Half a century together. The best 50 years of my life, Lucas said. And if I had it to do over, I would not change a single thing. Not even the first few months when I burned every meal and you had to eat biscuits like rocks, Lucas laughed, the sound deep and warm. Not even that. It was all part of our story, Francis. The good and the bad, the easy and the hard, it all mattered. It all brought us here. Francis leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body next to hers. They had been through so much together. The early years of building the ranch and learning to be married. The births of their children. The hardships of droughts and harsh winters and the constant demands of ranch life. The joys of watching their children grow and their family expand. Through it all, they had been partners, choosing each other every single day. Thank you, Francis said softly, for seeing me that day, for helping me when you did not have to, for choosing me and James and giving us a life I never thought we could have. Thank you for accepting my proposal, for trusting me, for building this life with me, for giving me a family and a purpose and love beyond measure. Lucas took her hand and brought it to his lips. You are my heart, Francis Quinn. You always have been and you always will be. They sat there as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, holding hands and watching their grandchildren and great-grandchildren play in the yard below. The sound of laughter and conversation drifted up to them, the sound of family, of home, of love. Francis thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that scared pregnant woman stepping off a stagecoach to this moment, surrounded by a family that existed because a cowboy had decided that every child deserves a father who stays. Lucas had kept that promise to James, but he had also kept it to all their children. He had been present, engaged, loving, and committed through everything. More than that, he had shown her what real love looked like. Not the false promises and pretty words that Thomas had given her, but steady, reliable, everyday love that showed up in 1,000 small ways. In meals shared and work done side by side. In comfort during hard times and celebration during good ones. In the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world, even after 50 years together. Lucas Quinn had been her salvation, but she liked to think she had been his too. They had saved each other, really, and built something beautiful from their unlikely beginning. As the evening deepened, and the party below began to wind down, their children started gathering up tired grandchildren and preparing to head home. James came up to the porch to say goodnight. Thank you for the wonderful party, Francis said, hugging her son. Thank you for 50 years of showing us what love and commitment look like, James replied. Sarah and I, we model our marriage after yours. You taught us that love is about choosing each other every day, about working together through whatever comes. That is your legacy, Mama, Papa. Not just the ranch, but the example you set. After everyone had left and the house was quiet, Lucas helped Francis to bed. They moved slower now than they once had, their bodies aged and weathered by years of hard work. But they moved together, in sync after so many years. As they lay in bed, Francis's head on Lucas's shoulder as it had been for countless nights, she felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. We did well, did we not? She asked softly. We did better than well, Lucas replied. We did magnificently. And as they drifted off to sleep, Francis knew he was right. They had taken an impossible situation and turned it into something wonderful. They had proved that family is not just about blood, but about love and choice and commitment. They had built a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. The years that followed their golden anniversary were quieter but no less full of love. Lucas and Francis were in their 70s now, and though they still lived on the ranch and were involved in family matters, they had fully handed over the day-to-day operations to their sons. They spent their days in gentle pursuits, tending Francis's garden, taking slow walks around the ranch property, and enjoying visits from their ever-expanding family. They had lived to see their family grow to include 23 grandchildren and 12 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. In the spring of 1932, Lucas fell ill with pneumonia. Despite the best efforts of the doctor from El Paso and the loving care of Francis and their children, he did not recover. He passed away peacefully in his sleep with Francis holding his hand, his children gathered around his bed. Francis was devastated by the loss. After 54 years together, she felt as though part of her soul had been torn away. But she was surrounded by love and support from her large family, and she took comfort in knowing that Lucas had lived a full, happy life. At his funeral, the church was packed with family, friends, and people whose lives Lucas had touched over the decades. James gave the eulogy, speaking about his father's integrity, kindness, and unwavering commitment to family. "My father was not a perfect man, but he was a good man," James said. "He taught us that what matters in life is not where you start, but how you live. He taught us that family is built through love and choice, not just blood. He taught us that keeping your word and treating people with respect are the foundations of a good life. And he taught us by example what it means to love someone completely and faithfully, from the day you meet them until the day you die." Francis wept as she listened, but they were tears of grief mixed with gratitude. She had been blessed with 54 years of love from a truly remarkable man. After Lucas passed, Francis moved into town to live with Clara and her family, as the ranch house felt too empty without him. But she visited the ranch often, checking on the operations and spending time with James and his family who still lived on the property. Francis lived another 8 years after Lucas's death, years filled with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told stories about the old days, about arriving in San Elizario pregnant and afraid, about Lucas's proposal, about building their life together. She wanted to make sure the younger generations understood where they came from and the love that had built their family. In the summer of 1940, at the age of 86, Francis passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was buried next to Lucas on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together, with a simple headstone that read, "Francis Quinn, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. 1854–1940. She was loved." At her funeral, her children and grandchildren shared memories. James, now in his 60s with grandchildren of his own, spoke about his mother's courage and strength. "My mother could have given up so many times," he said. "When she found out she was pregnant and the man who promised to marry her abandoned her, when her father threw her out. When she arrived in a strange town with no family and no prospects. But she did not give up. She kept going, and she built a life that none of us could have imagined. She taught us resilience and grace and how to love without limits." He paused, looking out at the gathered family. "My mother once told me that she used to be ashamed of how she arrived in San Elizario, but she should not have been. That moment, that desperate, scared moment when she stepped off the stagecoach, led to all of this. It led to meeting my father. It led to this family. It led to all of us being here today." Her courage in the face of shame and fear created a legacy of love that will continue for generations. As Francis was laid to rest next to Lucas, the family gathered around the graves. The ranch stretched out below, still thriving under the management of the Quinn family. The house had been expanded again to accommodate James's growing family, and a second house had been built for Samuel and his wife. The ranch that Lucas had started with 100 acres and 50 cattle now covered thousands of acres and supported multiple generations of the family. But more than the physical legacy, Lucas and Frances had left a legacy of love and acceptance. They had shown their children and grandchildren that family is what you build, not just what you are born into. They had demonstrated that love is about choosing each other every day, about commitment through good times and bad, about standing together against whatever life throws at you. James stood by the graves long after everyone else had left, thinking about his parents and all they had given him. He thought about his father's words spoken so long ago. That child deserves a father who stays. Lucas had not just stayed. He had been present, engaged, and loving every single day of James's life. He had never once made James feel like he was anything other than his true son. And his mother, who had faced shame and rejection with such courage and grace, who had built a warm, loving home and raised 6 children to be good, kind people. She had shown him what real strength looked like. As the sun set over the ranch, James made a promise to his parents' memories. He would continue the legacy they had started. He would teach his children and grandchildren about love and acceptance and family. He would make sure the story of how Frances arrived pregnant and ashamed, and how Lucas had given her and her unborn child a chance, was never forgotten. Because it was not just a story about his parents. It was a story about hope and redemption and the transformative power of love. It was a story about how one person's kindness can change everything. It was a story about how family is built through choice and commitment, not just biology. And it was a story worth remembering, worth passing down through the generations, so that everyone in the Quinn family would know where they came from and the love that had built their foundation. Years later, James's grandson would write down the family story, preserving it for future generations. It would be read at family gatherings, shared with new members joining the family through marriage, and taught to children so they would understand their heritage. The Quinn Ranch continued to thrive, passed down through generations, each one adding to the legacy that Lucas and Frances had started. The family grew and expanded, branches spreading across Texas and beyond, but they always remembered their roots in San Elizario and the ranch where it all began. And every generation learned the story of how their great-great-grandmother Frances arrived 6 months pregnant and ashamed in a small Texas border town, with nothing but a trunk and a prayer. How a cowboy named Lucas saw her and decided to help, proposing marriage to give her and her baby security and respectability. How he had said, "That child deserves a father who stays," and had kept that promise every day for the rest of his life. It became the foundational story of the Quinn family, a reminder that love is a choice, that family is built through commitment and kindness, and that sometimes the hardest moments in life lead to the greatest blessings. Frances and Lucas's great-great-grandchildren would visit the graves on the hillside, looking out over the ranch that their ancestors had built from nothing but love and hard work. They would tell their own children the story, keeping the memory alive, ensuring that Frances and Lucas's legacy of love would never be forgotten, because in the end, that was what mattered most. Not the size of the ranch or the money in the bank, but the love they had shared and the family they had built. A family that started with a scared young woman, a kind cowboy, and a promise that a child deserves a father who stays. And Lucas Quinn had kept that promise, not just to James, but to all his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He had stayed. He had loved. He had built a legacy that would endure long after he was gone. That was the true measure of his life and of the love he had shared with Frances. Not in the years they lived, but in the generations that followed, all of them touched by the love story that had started with a simple act of kindness on a dusty Texas street in 1878. The sun set over the Quinn Ranch, as it had thousands of times before, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. The land stretched out, vast and beautiful, worked by the hands of multiple generations of Quinns. In the distance, the lights of the ranch houses glowed warm and welcoming, filled with family and love and laughter. And somewhere, beyond the sunset, Francis and Lucas were together again, their love story complete, their legacy secure in the family they had created and the love they had shared. They had taken an impossible situation and turned it into something beautiful. They had proved that love is stronger than shame, that family is built through choice, and that sometimes the greatest love stories start in the most unlikely ways. Their story would live on, passed down through generations, a reminder that one moment of kindness, one choice to help someone in need, can change everything. That a child truly does deserve a father who stays, and that real love is about showing up, day after day, through good times and bad, and choosing each other every single time. This was the legacy of Francis and Lucas Quinn, and it was a legacy of love that would never die.